Hello, welcome to Locked On Sharks, the premier hockey podcast of your favorite team in the Bay Area. And on today's episode, it is a full-on Patrick Marleau conversation. I'm going to talk about Marleau, what he means to the Sharks, what he means to us personally. I'm going to talk about his kind of Hall of Fame case. So all that and more on today's episode of Locked On Sharks.
You're Locked On Sharks, your daily podcast on the San Jose Sharks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I'm your host, JD Young, contributor at Fear the Fin, RIP, and San Jose Hockey Now. And with me today, the most famous of the blog boys, Marcus White, former Fear the Fin contributor, also worked at NBCS and Bay Area. Now you work for an actual real paper, right? The San Francisco Examiner. You have proved to all of us aspiring bloggers you can actually make it. Marcus, how are you doing, buddy?
I'm doing really well. You know, if I can set one example, it's going backwards in technology in my career. Started out at a blog, wrote for a TV station, then a radio station. Now I'm at a newspaper. Hopefully all the blog boys and aspiring blog people out there can end their career like me, hopefully doing website stuff for cave paintings, maybe carrier pigeons.
I know. What's before the newspaper? I assume you're gonna have pamphlets. Are you gonna be doing pamphlets?
Yeah.
You're gonna have to full on like releasing pamphlets out at the local square.
Yeah, I think, you know, writing for the website of a literal town crier. The town I grew up in, the newspaper was called the Town Crier, but maybe, you know, we can bring back a literal town crier.
Oh, that would be great. I think a town crier in 2023 would be amazing. Just like I always picture like Corpse Bride, the town crier, just like the most ridiculous news. That would be great in 2023. But no town crier needed for today's episode because we're talking about Patrick Marleau's retirement. Before we get into today's episode, do want to know that it is brought to you guys by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. So Patrick Marleau, Saturday, becoming the first Shark to get his jersey retired. Let's start with what Patrick Marleau means to you. I mean, we'll kind of go back and forth here. I'll start with you, Marcus. What do you think about when you think of Patrick Marleau? What does he mean to you as a Sharks fan?
Yeah, I think what he means for Sharks fans is his arc is the team's arc, right? You know, he comes into the league in 97. The Sharks are a young franchise. They've only made the playoffs a couple of times, but as he matured, you know, the franchise kind of matured. When he took the next step beyond just promising young player, they made it to a conference final, right? When he, after the first lockout, emerged as a legitimate star. You know, everybody remembers that Joe Thornton season in 05-06, but Marleau was just behind him on the team points lead. The Sharks took that next step. And I think it was, I think for Sharks fans, it was especially meaningful to see him score in the Stanley Cup final in 2016. It felt like, you know, independent of the result, and, you know, maybe Sharks fans couldn't say that at the time, that it felt like, okay, he's finally on this stage. And I think for a certain brand of extremely online Sharks fan as well, like, you know, you and I grew up, you know, consuming media in the way we did. I think Sharks fans saw, you know, criticism of Marleau as criticism of them, and knocks on their legitimacy as a fan base, you know, when there were knocks on his legitimacy as a star. So I think it's fitting that he's the first player to have his number retired in Sharks history because of that reason. Yeah,
I mean, famously, I grew up a Flyers fan, right? And I didn't become a Sharks fan until I moved to California. But Marleau was the first player I was like, this guy, you know, like, wow. Seeing him, especially, you know, pre-lockout for us kind of older guys, like the game was just slower, you know, like it was just a lot of checking and very physical and just a much slower brand of hockey. And then seeing a guy like Marleau with his speed, right? And he's kept that speed through his mid-30s of just being, I'm going to be the fastest guy out here. And like seeing that speed and seeing that talent combined with that speed, that's what drew me to him, you know, of just this guy who, you know, we know he's a very quiet guy. That's just kind of how he is and stuff, but, you know, not going to be the rah-rah type of guy or the funny guy like Joe Thornton. But just the way he would put his head down and get to work, like beating that beating that icing, beating that forecheck, he's going to just kind of use his speed and just kind of outwork you. And you can see he's the first jersey I got back in the day at SAP Center. You could before the game, you could go and order a jersey, and by the second period, they would come and hand it to you at your seat, way back in the day. And that was my buddy Rodney and I got a Marleau jersey. He got a Thornton jersey. And those two players were kind of forever locked together. I mean, for my fandom, and I think for a lot of Sharks fandom, of Thornton and Marleau locked together. And Thornton will get his number retired at some point when he officially retires. But like you said, I think it had to be Marleau. All right. Marleau had to be the guy who got his jersey retired first, right?
Yeah, I think so. I wrote about this at NBC Sports in 2019. We did a week examining kind of the top 5 candidates for jersey retirements. And Marleau was always the obvious number one. And really the only argument against retiring him first was to wait until Thornton does, and then you retire both of them on the same night. You
can't do that. You can't do that. Yeah.
Right. That would be a lot of spotlight to share. But no, I think he's Mr. Shark for a reason, right? And I think the speed was so appealing.
Mm-hmm.
He was a real homegrown draft pick, who hit.
Yeah.
You could say, Pat Falloon was a young face of the team early on, but that was a much different Sharks franchise, a much less mature Sharks franchise than the one Marleau joined and the one Marleau ultimately left. And I think Sharks fans saw, themselves in him. I think those 2 winning goals he scored against the Detroit Red Wings, and that to finally get over that hump and get back to the conference final, I think really just kind of epitomized his journey and the Sharks' own journey to contention in a lot of ways. And I think there's so many moments in his career, I think, that are at the top of mind for Sharks fans and are going to be at the top of their mind on Saturday when his jersey is ultimately lifted in the rafters.
All right, before we get into some of those moments, we're going to talk about kind of Marleau's legacy in the NHL, kind of where he fits among the Sharks as well. Do want to take a quick break, talk to you guys about our friends over at Built Bar. If you guys don't know by now, Built Bar is a delicious treat, but without the guilt. I know holidays are over, maybe trying to eat a little bit healthier right now, but you want to actually eat something that tastes good. That's where Built Bars come in. They're covered in 100% real chocolate. That's right, real chocolate. And they come in great flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, coconut almond. Each one has 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, and a whopping 17 grams of protein. And if you're like me and you're very impatient, you hate waiting for things to come in the mail, you can head over to your local Walmart or Sam's Club today to pick up a box. Walmart, you can get a 4-bar box of cookies and cream, double chocolate or coconut puffs. Or if you got a Sam's Club membership, run and grab a 13-bar box with all their hit flavors like brownie, batter, and churro. Or if you want to peruse a wide variety of them, check out Built.com. I like the box that's got a little bit of everything, so you can try a bunch of different flavors, figure out which one is your favorite. So check out Built.com at Walmart, Sam's Club, or at Built.com. All right. So, I think Joe Thornton is the best player ever in Sharks history. But Patrick Marleau is right there. I think he's on the Mount Rushmore of Sharks players, right? Easily, no doubt.
Yeah, I think anyone arguing otherwise, I think would have a tough time making that argument. I'd love to hear it, because I can't think of. I will. Kyle will say he's a compiler. He was never the best player on his team. He rode the coattails of Joe Thornton. So that would be his argument. But that's why Kyle's not on today's podcast for this. So, yeah, I think those are all. I think there is an element of Marleau's legacy, right? Is that he was. He was around for as long as he is. He broke Gordie Howe's record. And I think that's such much like Ovechkin chasing down Gretzky's goal scoring record. Those are records you grow up thinking there is no way somebody's going to come close to this. And I think, sure, you can make the argument that Marleau maybe stuck around too long. I would say he was still a pretty effective player in his penultimate season, when he was traded to Pittsburgh. And then a few days later, this thing called COVID-19 happened. Not sure if you've heard about this.
Yes, I started a podcast about a month before that happened. So yes,
there you go. Yeah, you're well aware.
Yes.
But I think without one thing that can't be ignored, I think, in his legacy too, is that we were robbed a little bit of some of prime Patrick Marleau, right? I mean, coming off 03-04, the Sharks are a Western Conference finalist and 2 games away from making to the Stanley Cup final. Then there's no season. 12-13, he comes flying out of the gates in a 48 game season, but it was only 48 games. 82 plus 34 wiped out. That's 116 if I'm doing the math off the top of my head correctly.
Yep.
He gets
another
to that 12, record a lot.
Another 12 at COVID with the COVID season as well, right? That season gets ended 12 games short. So yeah.
Absolutely. Yep. I think he breaks that record a lot sooner without the stoppages that were out of his control. And I think his games played record is remembered a lot differently in that case. And I think too, I wonder how much a part of his, that the buyout in Toronto, how much that's going to affect how he's perceived. I know he was beloved by the players in Toronto. Yes. I remember during John Tavares' first visit to San Jose, talked with him a little bit about, he spoke with Marleau about leaving behind the only franchise he ever knew and what kind of an asset he was in the locker room to the team. Guys like Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner speak the world of him.
I mean, Austin Matthews breaking out the Marleau jersey in San Jose
honestly, I think one of the more underrated Marleau moments. I was there for that All-Star game. The crowd loved it. That was such a cool tribute. From a Bay Area, the Bay Area's own Austin Matthews.
Yes. He's coming home, baby.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. I think so. I'm curious to see if even with that impact he had on those young players, because he was bought out, because it was a salary dump, I think there's a misremembering of how good Marleau actually was before then. And also how he's still pretty effective, in his career. I mentioned how his arc kind of mirrored the Sharks. That kind of continued in his second to last year with the Sharks, right? The Sharks weren't very good, but he was still producing. He was still an entertaining player to watch. And I think, yes, that last COVID shortened season, I think it was clear he could still skate, but he was not the same player. But I do think Compilo is a little unfair given some of the aforementioned things out of his control that have robbed us of more of his prime.
Yeah. I know you forget the Pittsburgh. Yeah. 8 games with Pittsburgh, right? The lifelong, he's forever Hurricane with the buyout, of course, right. Getting traded to the Hurricanes and stuff. There's a little bit of tarnish on the record of him, but again, some of that stuff's not out of his control, right? Toronto cap situation, and they gave him too much money for too long of a time, and the Sharks were trying to. If the Penguins that year were pretty solid, if I remember going into that, like if he had gone and they'd won, gone to the Eastern Conference Finals or gone to the Stanley Cup with him, and he wins his, we would be having a different conversation. But again, COVID. Thanks a lot, COVID. So what is the one thing that you like, that one moment for Marleau? I mean, you talked about, there's a bunch of them, right? And I think for me personally, it's the goals against Detroit, right? The Thornton streaking down one side, Marleau streaking down the other. Thornton gets the pass over, Marleau taps it in, and they both like that. They go crazy. I think that's like my, you finally beat the Red Wings. This is it, right? That's the one I always kind of go to with Marleau. What about you?
I think for me, I mentioned it earlier, and I will, because I mentioned it earlier, it feels like cheating, so I'll give you another one after. But I think it's that goal against Pittsburgh in Game 1 of the Stanley Cup Finals. I think that just the Sharks being there represented such a catharsis, I think, for Sharks fans, just to see the team finally on the game's biggest stage. To have Doc Emmerich calling a Sharks game, how
I sat on my couch and cried like a baby when they won the Western Conference.
Right.
You've been so many heartbreaks, and you think this is the moment. Yeah, him scoring in that first game. Yeah, that's a good one too.
Yeah, and the game that sent them there, he had a multi-point night, right? And this is a guy who was constantly knocked for not delivering, and I think that goal is especially memorable as well because that season he requested a trade. It seemed like finally the years of the narrative. Marleau can't get it done in San Jose was coming to a head, but he still put his head down and performed, and then stayed another year, ended up crossing 500 goals, was one of their best players in 2016-17, if not their best goal scoring threat, to the point where I wrote about it at the time when he left. Timo Meier hadn't emerged yet. Kevin LeBanc hadn't emerged yet. There was an open question as to whether or not the Sharks could replace Patrick Marleau's production in the locker room. Ultimately they did. They also, they swing a deadline deal for Evander Kane later, and all of a sudden they're, 2 games away from going to the conference final in another season in which Joe Thornton tears his ACL, right? But it was an open question because of how good he still was at the time. My second answer is less of a moment, but more of a run. I think that that Heatley, Thornton, Marleau run in the lead up to the 2010 Olympics, and even after in that season, that was so special. I think as great as Jonathan Cheechoo was in the 05-06 season, I don't think Sharks fans had ever seen a line quite click like that. I mean, to the point where Team Canada literally copied and pasted them into the lineup.
Let's go put this over here, and you guys go do your thing.
Right, exactly. And on one of the greatest teams ever assembled, they were a key part of it. I think that is that's a huge testament to Marleau's career. I think the fact that he is a 2-time gold medalist on 2 of the greatest teams to ever play, and he played a lot of minutes on both of those teams. I think that's a testament to his ability as a hockey player for sure.
Yeah. Another one, like, I know this series he gets flack for is the Dallas series, right? But those 2 shorthanded goals where that kind of felt like the moment where it's like, of course it didn't, but that kind of felt like the moment where it was like, okay, this is Marleau kind of stepping up to the plate. And I know of course that Brian Campbell, you're getting a penalty in the 5th overtime, and that leads to the end of that series. But that moment kind of felt like, okay, we can see Marleau kind of taking that step. And unfortunately, if he didn't have the redemption in that series, but I'll never forget those 2 where it was just for that, like, okay, I'm going to try to do as much as I can here.
Right. And game 5 the next year against the Ducks, right? He scores the overtime winner, just banging at the puck until it finally goes in. I think there is a real resilience to his career arc that I think goes somewhat under discussed. I think a lot of it is because it never really seemed to phase him, at least to folks covering the team. He always seemed kind of nonplussed by some of the narratives, but these guys are they're human beings, right? You have to be aware of it. And I think the emotion you saw on his face, in particular in game 7 in 2011 against the Wings, when the Sharks almost got reverse swept and he scored what ended up being the game winning goal, was a pretty remarkable goal. And also you saw the emotion and how much it meant to him. And then that's another thing about Marleau is when he was in a slump, and every player gets in a scoring slump, right? No one's points are evenly distributed. It only took one for him to get hot. And I remember he was probably the best player in that series against Vancouver when the Sharks were, overmatched. Say what you will about the stanchion and how that changed things, but he was the Sharks' best player on the ice that series. And I think a lot of times that kind of goes unmentioned in memories of Marleau's career of, okay, when he did have dry spells, how he responded and ultimately how he stepped up. Yeah.
All right. Does Patrick Marleau get in the Hall of Fame?
I think yes. I mean, I think my question is whether he's the first person. I mean, Doug Wilson is the first former Shark. Well, maybe not the first former Shark. One of the first former Shark.
One of kind of, grew up, developed, played their entire career Sharks.
We're not associated, Rob Blake's in the Hall of Fame, but we're not thinking, also
you don't think Rob, Sharks when you think of Rob Blake, right? Yeah.
Right. So I think he gets in, especially with Howe's record. I think he almost has to get in. I think that in and of itself is worthy, but a 2-time Olympic gold medalist, 500 goals, the face of a franchise that, has come to help signify the league's westward expansion, right? I mean, I think it's fair to say, Wayne Gretzky walked so the Sharks could run, so the Seattle Kraken and the Vegas Golden Knights could skate, right? I think that trajectory, and Marleau was a huge part in making, San Jose a hockey town and making the Sharks a, beloved team here, especially during those great years. My question is if they're just going to wait until Thornton is eligible and then they put them both in a la Teemu Selanne and Paul Kariya. That that's what I wonder if they seem to like those narrative kind of inductions, right? Especially with the Sedins and Luongo going in recently. How about you? You think he gets in? How long do you think he has to wait?
Yeah, I don't think he's a first ballot Hall of Famer. I can't remember like who retired and stuff recently, but like, yeah, I think he'll get in, right? I mean, how many 500 goal scorers are not in the Hall of Fame? It's
Jeremy Roenick, very famous.
Jeremy Roenick, who can go kiss bricks right now. But like, Jeremy Roenick's not in. Okay. But like a majority of them, and like you said, you have the longevity, you have one of the most sacred records, right? The games played. It makes a lot of sense, right? Especially if Thornton actually does officially retire. It kind of puts him like on a 1-year difference here right now. And then Marleau, Thornton's gonna be first ballot, first day. Like they're already building, they already got his bust and stature, whatever, like going. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think putting those two guys together, you can have Thornton set up Marleau's speech, like just slide right into one to the other. And yeah,
it's perfect.
It's perfect, right? So yeah, I think he does officially get in at some point. So yeah, I like I said, probably not first ballot. But yeah, I think the Thornton Marleau, that would be a really, really fun weekend.
if they're waiting on Thornton, it might be a while. He might never officially retire. But then again, Pronger,
I guess while he was still on the books was it the Coyotes? His contract was on the books with when he got inducted.
Oh yeah. I think so. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, he's probably still on the books. Yeah, it's like one of those things where he's still But that could be it. Where he never actually officially retires. And I think that's why like they didn't have him in the the Legends game until literally the last minute, because they were like, he might still come back. I had a high or a bold prediction that he would be playing in he would be lining up for the Sharks in the game that the Marleau gets his jersey retired, but looks like I'm gonna get that one wrong. So
there's still time. There's still time. As we are recording this, there's still time for it to happen.
Could you, Matt? He's like plays the Legend games. Like, this is great. I'll see you guys tomorrow night. His jersey's all hanging up and stuff, ready to go.
Yeah, it'd be another fitting capper to Joe Thornton's whole career, right? Like that would be one of the least surprising things I've heard.
He easily gets 2 points though, right?
Oh yeah.
All right. I'll give you any last thoughts on one Patrick Marleau before we get out of here, Marcus.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun. I always love talking hockey, any chance I get. I would say, I think I'm really excited to see, Sharks fans have something to cheer about tomorrow, right? It's been really since 2019, it's been a bit of a rough few years. And I think Marleau's return in the 2019-20 season, and even coming back in that 2020-21 season when the buildings were empty, I think gave Sharks fans during a pretty dark period at least something to hang on to and say, okay, all right, Patrick Marleau is wearing teal again. At least something is right. And I'm excited to see the crowd get into it tomorrow and to see his to see them give him the standoff he deserves. I mean, we talked about the Matthews moment. It blew the roof off at the All-Star game. His first return with Toronto and the ovation he got, I still remember being there for that. I think tomorrow's or Saturday rather, because we're recording this on a Thursday. I don't know when this is releasing, if I'm violating any NDAs,
no,
but
you're fine. So.
But I think Saturday is going to be a moment for Sharks fans to cherish, especially ahead of what could be a very difficult few days here coming up with the trade deadline and some of the players that might be on the way out. So I think any chance you have as a sports fan to celebrate and to remember some guys, you have to take advantage of. And I think Saturday is going to give Sharks fans the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, it's the one I know for the I've been very hard on, of course, leading the tank, but like it's the one day where I'm putting the tank on pause. Like you can't lose on Patrick Marleau's retire. Actually, that'd be the most fitting thing would be for him to lose a crucial moment on Patrick Marleau's retirement jersey. So
I mean, but given the opponent, if the tank does have to roll on, you would take it.
Yes, yeah, especially and the way the Blackhawks are playing right now, they're absolutely on fire. So yes, I assume they scheduled the Blackhawks kind of like how teams schedule homecoming, like against some oh yeah,
Yes.
I think we could beat the Blackhawks, and
Yeah.
yeah, now
Either
they're
that
coming.
or or it's, oh, we know it's going to be a big crowd. So when I was at Syracuse a couple times, they
Yeah,
scheduled Clemson for homecoming. Those didn't turn into Syracuse homecoming wins, but big crowd. So
big crowds. Yes. Well, I mean, we saw they scheduled the Doug Wilson, retirement night against the Blackhawks, and the Blackhawks won that game. So yeah, we'll see if the Blackhawks are going to be spoilers again. Marcus, thank you so much for your time. Where can the people find you?
oh wow! Well, you can follow me on Twitter at Marcus P. White. You can find some of my work at the San Francisco Examiner. A lot of general assignment stuff, a little bit of sports, a whole lot of news about San Francisco and the Bay Area. And yeah, my Twitter feed's the best place to find me. Occasionally posting some lukewarm takes about sports and pop culture.
I do love the Marvel, your little Marvel thread with like all the movies. That one's a good one. So yes, that one's good. So and great Star Wars takes as well. So Marcus, thank you very much. Of course, you can find me on Twitter at MyFryhole. You can listen to the show wherever you get podcasts, watch on YouTube as well. You guys know the whole deal by now. So if you're at the game, please enjoy the Marleau retirement. That I think that place is going to be insane. So have a good time, and we'll catch you guys on Monday. Until then, bye, friends.